So Matt, we've got streams and locations in RaceDay Scoring. What's the difference between those two?
Great question. So when we built RaceDay Scoring many years ago, we had to support a bunch of different hardware products out there. So all sorts of different chip systems manage their data very differently. And we knew that we needed to be flexible with the way that we took that data in and used it for scoring purposes. So basically, when you think of a stream, what it is a stream of data. So it's a single feed of data, essentially. It is all of your chip reads at a given location, typically a reader, sometimes multiple readers, depending on the specific chip system that you use. Because each and every chip system handles their data differently. Each and every single setup for a stream is totally different. In general, you would have at least one stream connected to a timing location. The idea is you're going to send all of the data from this feed to one location. Now, there's situations where you need to have one stream of data being sent to multiple locations. And there are situations where you want to have multiple streams of data going to one location. So some systems out there, for example, iPico, you need to set up a single stream for each and every single reader that you have. So if I went and set up, let's say, a iPico Direct Connect system, I would have to provide an IP address. And the way that iPico works is that you physically connect to the readers onto the network that you're working on, and you have to know the IP address of each and every reader, and then you have to assign them to a location. So typically at a finish line, have you seen like finish lines where they have multiple rows of mats? Mm-hmm. So what you'll have to do with an iPico system is you'll have a primary mat and a backup mat. And each of those mats have their own reader. Each of the readers has their own IP address. So with RaceDay Scoring, you would set up two streams, a main and a backup for iPico, because you have to connect directly to each and every device. Now, other systems out there, like MyLapse, for example, they have a different kind of configuration. They require what's called a timing and scoring location name. And in timing and scoring, you connect to each of the readers individually, but you can group them together into a location on their end. So in MyLapse, you don't have to set up two streams if you had two readers. You could set up one stream that's called finish, and it's taking in all of the reads that are grouped together in timing and scoring, which is MyLapse's middleware product. So in this example, you would typically just have a single stream for MyLapse called finish. Even though it's collecting reads from multiple readers, we don't care about it and we don't know about it. It's just all coming in as one. And so this is one of the reasons why you might have to have multiple streams connected to a single location. The other example, when you would need to have a single stream connected to multiple locations, is in this case where, let's say I have a 5K and a 10K, and the 10K started really, really late in the day. You could create separate locations for the 5K and the 10K, use the same stream in both locations, but set up your time filtering such that this location is only going to collect reads from this time to this time, and this location is only going to be used for the 5K, and another one for the 10K. So basically, it's a way of allowing you to have more granular control over the time filtering for each event. So whereas if it was a single location, you couldn't really do that. You couldn't say any of the reads that are on this location that are applicable towards people who are in the 10K get a different filtering. You can't really do that. You have to have separate locations in order to do that. So that's one of the reasons why you might need to do one stream to many locations. But yeah, the basic idea is that we're very flexible in the customization and the capabilities of setting up streams and timing locations to suit any of your needs. Basically, it's very, very dependent on your chip system that you use and your physical layout, how you set things up on race day, and your preference. So a lot of times when people ask these kind of questions, we're like, hey, how do I set up streams and timing locations? We'll say, tell us a bit about what you're working with. What kind of chip systems do you have? How do you usually lay out your hardware? Do you have primary mats? Do you have backup mats? How do you manage your readers? There's all sorts of questions that we need to ask you about in order to give you a best recommendation in terms of how you should configure all this stuff. So this is when we usually recommend that people set up a training session with Crisp, who's our race day expert, and he does this every day. He goes through requests from people saying, hey, how do I set up a race like this? He'll give them a best practice recommendation, and they'll be good to go usually from there.
So back on the locations page, the start for so if you have a location for the start of the 5K and then the location for the start of the 10K, that could be the same physical location.
That's right. Yeah.
You're just separating them out so you can have two different settings on each.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah. It's basically really just about being able to have different filtering rules for different scored events. Now, with the recent addition of these min finish time allowed and max chip start time offset features, it's not as critical because you now have the ability on the scored event level to say, hey, anybody in the 5K shouldn't have a time that's, less than this and a chip offset that's greater than this. The max chip start time offset is basically like, hey, no one should have a chip start time that is more than 5 minutes after their assigned start time. This makes it a little bit more feasible to use a single location for multiple events, because this is effectively saying for each and every participant, look at their event and then determine would these two reads or would this read result in a time that's invalid for this scored event, and then determine whether or not to allow it. So another thing about streams is that we have a variety of different options for you. So like I said before, we have to support many different brands of chip hardware that are out there. So you'll see when you're adding a stream, you have all these different options: active timing, ChronoTrack, iPico, MyLapse, Search Result, RFID, Trident, and manual. So these are all direct options. You'll see they all say like direct or direct connect or something like that. There's also this file option here. So for each system out there, we have a file stream and a direct stream. So file streams, basically you provide a directory for the system to look at, and then any number of files that are in that directory or in that folder are considered for this stream. So some chip systems out there, they'll spit out multiple files for a single reader. Others put one file for a single reader. We say, okay, give me a folder and I'll just consider everything within it. So it supports both systems that spit out one file and systems that spit out multiple files. So this way you don't have to put files individually into RaceDay Scoring. And the way it works for file streaming is it is a really fast system. It's not like Race Director where you actually go and you browse for a file and select it and import it and it processes it. The way that file streaming works is we look at a folder and we turn on the reads connection button. And now from that point going forward, we look at all files in there. And if we detect that a new line has been added to any of the files, we pick up that new line and import it into the system immediately, like right away. So we're actually actively looking at this directory that you're telling us to look at and checking to see if there's any changes that happen. And then immediately, as soon as that change is detected, we import that new row into RaceDay Scoring. So some people are worried about using file streams because they think they'll be slower than a direct stream. We find that they're pretty much the same. As soon as that file is updated, we import it. And the nice benefit about file streaming is that you can always go back to the file to see if something is going wrong. For troubleshooting purposes, it's really helpful to be able to look at an actual log and file of the data that was there so that you can see, oh yeah, well, the read was missing from my reader actually. When you do direct streaming, it's like it's like a pipe of data, and it's just dumping it into us. And the problem with that is that there's no real way to go back in time and see what was sent. So with file streaming, you can go back to the file, you can look and see, oh, I was missing this read. Maybe I should double check my system and see what's wrong. Whereas with direct streaming, you can't really inspect that very easily. So typically we suggest file streaming, again, just because you can go back to the file if you need to. And it's nice because you can more easily troubleshoot. You can re-import the stream very simply. So those are the differences between direct and file. I also think that direct streaming, things can go wrong with direct connections. All sorts of weird things happen. You have a firewall on your computer that's blocking a communication over a port. There's all sorts of weird things that can happen with direct that just makes it a little bit less stable than file streaming. So I typically suggest file streaming. So when you select a file stream here, let's say I wanted to set up a MyLapse file stream. I wouldn't select MyLapse direct. What I would do is I would select file, and then I would select MyLapse readlite file. That's the format that they use. And so I would do that. And you'll see all these things change based on the systems. Each system's different. So in this case, I need to tell it, is it a bib tag or a pro chip system? Those are different kinds of MyLapse hardware that are out there. And basically this will determine what kind of format file we're dealing with and what one we would expect. And you would say, okay, I want this to look at this folder here. And I would define what folder that I should be bringing in the data from. So it's really important that you don't have a bunch of random files, because we're going to try and look at everything and interrogate it and determine whether or not it's read data. And if you have a bunch of random files in there, it's just going to bog the system down, because it's going to be trying to look through it and see if there's reads in this random file that it really shouldn't be looking at. So make sure you keep your data folders clean, and you should be good to go. In here, you can say what locations you want to use this stream for. You can use one or many. Now, typically, we assign chip systems as a main system. And a backup stream, usually it's a manual backup system that you'd be using. There's all sorts of different options for you in manual backup systems. Typically, you could be using like the mobile timing app, or you could be using a Summit timer or something like that. The way that backup streams work is we will only use a backup read for someone if no read at all exists for that person on a main system. So it will only ever pick it up and use it if there's nothing there. But if there is at least one there, it will revert and use the main one. So usually what we do with read selection is, if it's a start read, we take the last scene time within the time parameters I have set up. If it's a finish read, I take the earliest scene one, because, let's say you finish a 5K, you walk around the finish afterwards. Mm-hmm. You don't want that late finish. You want that early finish, right? You want to get the shortest net time, so the latest start and the earliest finish. So we select reads based on that. But if you're using a backup stream, let's say you missed your read on the start or on the finish. You missed your read on the finish, and you were recording on a backup system. We would select that backup system until you got a read in this main, even if it was worse. So we usually don't really like using the backups unless you absolutely have to. Typically, all streams are assigned as a main. It's not like in some systems where you have to have separate streams for each reader, like iPico. You typically will have to do that. You wouldn't set up one system as a main and another as a backup. You'd usually assign both as a main, because they're both chip systems and they should be considered equally. But again, this is the kind of thing where there's no hard and set rules. Like you should see how it works when you have a scenario that is typical for you, and try it out, see what happens. But that's usually what we suggest, is try it out, or set up a time to discuss what's going on with you, and we'll help you out.
So if somebody went over the line and finished and they didn't get a read,
yeah,
and it went to their backup read,
yeah,
then if they would just happen to be walking around and they walk over the line like 10 minutes later, it's going to switch to that.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay.
The later one. Yeah. Even though it's, it's better the backup was better
Mhm.
because earlier, we're going to say, oh no, that was only a backup. They got a main. That's the right one. We're going to go use that one. So that's why we usually say, hey, if you're really sure that your backups are good and they're solid and they're not erroneous, just make it a mainstream. They'll be considered equally. And then it would always use that earlier read for that person.